Ciao a tutti, welcome back to Daily Italian with Elena. Today we're going to look at a new tense. As you know, in Italian there are many tenses, many different tenses. Some of them are used a little bit more and some of them a little bit less, but it's still good to try and learn all of them, even the ones that are used less, at least in a passive way. The tense we're going to talk about today, it's quite important, it's used daily, and it's Passato Prossimo. This tense is used to talk about past actions, but which past actions? We use this tense to talk about actions that happened once, just once in the past, that happened and are finished, concluded. They just happened, there is no consequence in the present time, just finished. And actions that maybe happen more than once, but in a specific time, in a specific moment. So how do we form this tense? To form Passato Prossimo, we need two elements. The first one is an auxiliary and the second one is the past participle. The first one, the auxiliary, it's either gonna be the verb to be, essere, or the verb to have, avere. And then we'll have a look at when to use which, how to understand which to use, because it's a bit tricky. The second element is the part participle of the verb we want to use. So let's talk about the auxiliaries. The auxiliary to be, essere, is mostly used when we have a verb that's intransitive, which means it doesn't have an object, it doesn't do an action to something, to someone else. So mostly with verbs that indicate a state of being or a movement, for example. And it's also used with reflexive verbs. So all the reflexive verbs in the Passato Prossimo are going to use the auxiliary to be, essere. The auxiliary to have, avere, is mostly used with the transitive verbs, so the verbs that have an object or do or can do an action to an object, to a person, to something or someone. There are also exceptions. One example that I can already make is that with verbs that mostly indicate a sport, for example to swim, to dance, we use the auxiliary to have. It doesn't make sense to me as an Italian, because if you think about it, they don't do an action to an object. You don't swim something, you don't dance something, but they still want the auxiliary to have. So maybe try to think about the fact that you can dance a song, for example, or a dance. So you can try and remember this rule with this little trick. Now let's have a look at the second part, the second element, that's the part participle. To form this, we need the verb that we want to use. So let's have some examples. Let's take three different verbs that each belong to a different group. Do you remember the groups are, ere, and ire? So let's take one verb for each group, because we'll have a look at how the verb transforms based on which groups it belongs to. So, for example, if we take the verb mangiare, it's my favorite examples, to eat, mangiare. This ends in are. What we're gonna do is just to take away this ending are, but sort of keep this a, and just add t and o, ato, mangiato. So this is our second element, mangiato. Now let's try and put it together. So we said we use the auxiliary. What auxiliary would you use here? Let's think about it. It's a transitive verb because we can eat something. There can be an object, see here. So we're going to use the auxiliary to have, avere. So if I want to say I have eaten, I'm gonna say io ho mangiato. That's it. Something you need to remember already is that when we use the auxiliary to have, the second element, this past participle, is not going to change. Meaning, for all the people, for all the subjects, it's always the same, always ending with this O. Io ho mangiato, tu hai mangiato, loro hanno mangiato, and so on. Now let's take a verb for the second group. Let's take, for example, the verb cadere. This means to fall, cadere. Here is not that simple because we still take this ere and we take it away, but instead of putting this I, we put an U, caduto. So for the second group, the ending is in uto, caduto. Let's try and form a phrase here. Which auxiliary are we going to use? So here, this is not a transitive verb. We don't have an object. We are not doing an action, something to an object or to someone, to a person. This is like a change of state of being. To fall, you change your state of being. So the auxiliary to be. Io sono caduto. I have fallen. Io sono caduto. Now, something more to remember is that when we use the auxiliary to be, essere, the second element, this past participle, is going to change according to the subject. What does this mean? This means that this ending in O is going to change if the subject is a female instead of a male, if the subject is plural instead of singular. So let's have a look at some examples. We said io sono caduto to say I have fallen, but this is true, this is correct only if the subject is one and a male. I am going to say io sono caduta because I am female. Io sono caduta. If I want to say we have fallen as a group of males or a group of people where there is at least one male, one guy, noi siamo caduti, caduti. And for a group of females, if I want to say they, all girls, they have fallen, loro sono cadute, cadute. If you don't remember these endings, have a look again at the video about adjectives and endings, because it's just the same. We use the endings of the adjectives. Let's see now the endings for the third group before I say something else that you need to keep in mind. The third group is the group of verbs ending in ire. Let's take, for example, the verb dormire, to sleep, dormire. This one is gonna be an easy one because it's just gonna be dormito. So we'll keep this I, dormito. Which auxiliary would you use here? Technically, in my opinion, there is no object here. I find it hard to think, to see it as in you sleep something. But you could think, for example, that you're sleeping a night or something like that. Anyway, where I'm going with this is that you need to use the auxiliary to have. Io ho dormito. I have slept. Io ho dormito. So we've seen the endings for each second element, for each group of the past participle, and we've seen that this second element doesn't change if we have the auxiliary to have, but it will change if we have the auxiliary to be. There is another rule to consider, another exception, let's say. When we use the auxiliary to have, but we have a pronoun in a sentence, so a pronoun that goes before the verb, the past participle will change, even if we are using the auxiliary to have. Let's have an example so you can understand it a little bit better. If I want to say, for example, I watched them, as in I watched the kids, for example, I can say io ho guardato I bambini. These kids, I want to transform it as in them, a pronoun. So if you remember from the video about pronouns, this pronoun is going to be plural and male. So li ho guardato. But watch out, because there is this pronoun, the past participle is going to change according to this pronoun. So plural and male. Li ho guardati. It's easy because it's the same ending. if I want to say I watched it, like the television, ho guardato la televisione, female and singular, so la ho guardata. So it's always the same ending. It's easy in that sense, but maybe sometimes it's hard to remember that you need to change this ending. Don't worry, it takes time, but you'll get there. Something else you need to remember, or better to study, is that not most, but so many of the past participles are going to be irregular. So there are many that are easy, like guardare, guardato, dormire, dormito, partire, partito, and so on. But there are many irregulars. Maybe in the future I will make a video about it, showing you a little bit of these irregular past participles. For the moment, I'm just going to leave you some of them in the description or in the comments of this video, and you can start studying, learning them. It's a bit boring maybe to learn irregular verbs, but it's the only way you can do it. You can study them, you can learn them just in a passive way by finding examples in podcasts, in videos, in books, etc. But you just need to learn them. The more you find them, the more you're gonna get used to it and remember them, but you just need to learn them. So I'm just gonna leave you a list in there. The only irregular verbs that we're going to look at today together is the verbs to be and to have, because are very important, so I wanted to have a look at them. So to be, essere. How do we form the passato prossimo of this verb? Io sono stata. I'm going to use stata because I'm talking about myself, but if you're a male you can say io sono stato. Tu sei stato o tu sei stata. Lui è stato, lei è stata. Noi siamo stati, if we are males or a group with at least one male. Noi siamo stati. Voi siete stati. Voi siete state. Loro sono stati. Loro sono state. And this is passato prossimo of the verb to be. Passato prossimo of the verb to have. Io ho avuto. Here it's not gonna change. Avuto is always avuto. It doesn't matter if you're male or female, always avuto. Tu hai avuto. Lui o lei ha avuto. Noi abbiamo avuto. Voi avete avuto. Loro hanno avuto. Something more that I'm going to leave in the comments probably is some exercises that you can do. I'm gonna leave you some sentences in English that you can try if you want. You can try and translate and leave a comment with your exercise, with your translations and your passato prossimo, and if you want, just leave it there and I will have a look at it and I will check if it's all correct or not. You can try and practice. That was it for passato prossimo. Try to practice, as always, practice as much as you can. Maybe write some sentences, some random things. You can think about things that you did yesterday or last week or last month and try to translate them in Italian. In the next video we're going to talk about another past tense, which is imperfetto. We're gonna have a look just at imperfetto in the next video, and in the video after we're going to compare them, passato prossimo and imperfetto, because they can be a bit tricky to remember which one to use. So thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to keep on learning with me, if you want to learn more grammar, or if you want to have a look at some blogs or just listen to Italian. I will see you next time. Ciao!